Hey, First Assembly, this is Pastor Wes, and I want to welcome you to Wednesday Word. Hey, so good to be with you tonight, and we have been talking about living the life, and I know we have been in this theme for a while, but it's just one that just keeps on giving. It's like the Energizer Bunny. And last time that we were together, we talked about trials and in our lives, how trials, that when they come, when they hit our lives, it gives you a true picture of kind of where you are in your faith. When no one needs strength, everyone is strong. When everything is good, you don't need a lot of faith. But when hardships come and when trials hit our lives, they tend to show up unannounced. I wrote that they tend to disrupt whatever it is that you're doing, and they're a nuisance, and other times they can be straight up painful in our lives. And I know the word says that we should count it all joy when we fall into trials and temptations and various things like that, but you rarely ever feel like that when you're dealing with them, because emotions are there and all sorts of stuff. And so we talked a little bit about how we can wrestle with our flesh in these times. Like, I believe in God. You can believe in God, and you really do, and you have faith in God, and that God is in control, and that nothing comes to my life that doesn't pass through His hands, and I believe in this, and so I trust that. And yet sometimes we lay in bed at night and worry and think. We wake up in the middle of the night and go, man, what am I going to do if this happens or that happens? And we can stress and become anxious about things. And I kind of live those moments, and then I think about people in Scripture and who did great things for the Lord, and yet I wonder, did they feel it? Did they feel it like we feel it? Like, when Joshua was getting ready to go to battle and he goes off by himself to pray, and then an angel comes to him and he's like, are you with us? Are you with the enemy? And the angel's like, dude, I'm on God's side. But what was he feeling? Why would he go off and pray? Was he feeling the pressure? Was he feeling anxious? Was he feeling the pressure of the moment and dealing with his humanity like we do? And yet he went to God, and God came and showed Himself strong, And so we tend to take folks from Scripture, like Moses when he held the rod up before the Red Sea until the wind started blowing. He's like, well, here we go, Do we look at people in Scripture and elevate these folks almost to a place and a point that it's beyond what we're capable of? And I just want to know, did they feel it? When God stirs your heart to do something and to step out in something and to be obedient in something, and we feel the emotions of that, and yet we do it, is that what makes it faith? Can I obey and be nervous? Can I obey and kind of be frightened a little bit? And is that what makes it faith? When I feel one way, but I still put my trust in Him and move in obedience to Him. So, am I overcoming my emotions and my feelings and stepping out to honor God in those moments? Is that what makes it faith? And when I read the Scriptures, I keep coming back to this. When I read the Scriptures and you read the things, the stories of people that God used in great ways, did they feel it like we feel it? And I think they did. I think it is possible that trials and hardships are important to our spiritual development as people. And that's why James tells us to count them as joy, because there's something that they do in our hearts. They change us, they grow us, they stretch us. And there's a lot of hope in that. So there are some lessons, I think, in life that we're only going to learn through hardships and trials. I learned that I am stronger than I thought. Often, when hardships come into our lives, you find out, hey, I don't think I can do this, and you can do this, and you discover that because we're all still here. Or you discover you're weaker than you thought. I didn't think that would bother me. I thought I'd be okay, and it really was an issue for me. It really was hard for me to do. And so either way, we're going to learn. And that allows us to make changes and to pivot and to grow. And so trials, we defined a trial as this: an adverse set of circumstances in your life, either permitted or treated or allowed by God to develop you spiritually. And this is why all things can work together, because nothing happens outside of God. Okay, but in our trials, I need to allow God to have his way. I can actually be in a trial, fighting my way through a trial, trying to do what I think is right, trying to do what is the good thing. And if I don't know what God is accomplishing or attempting to accomplish in my life or through this, I can actually be fighting the trial and fighting the purpose of God in that, because I'm failing to hear him and to obey. And because I fail to learn or grow the way I'm supposed to grow. And I've said this before, that I think God wastes nothing, that God is big enough to make good come from anything that I allow him to move in. And so often in our trials, a big part of that is saying, God, I just invite you into this. My mind, my heart, my eyes, my ears, my hands. Help me to do what you want me to do. Help me to see what you want me to see, and help me to hear your voice in and through this all. Now I'm going to make this statement. You may not like it, but I think it's a true statement, that God's will for our lives is rarely painless, but always purposeful. But the life without God, like a life where I just live my life and do whatever I want and handle things however I want, I think is also painful at times, but it lacks purpose because we're all over the place. And so struggle's part of the journey, and the translations say this, various, which means multifaceted, that the trials that come are various trials. They're multifaceted, they're multicolored, meaning trials are going to come in all shapes and in all sizes, and sometimes it can feel like things just aren't going right. You just kind of hit a rough patch where things just don't work the way you want them to, and it's an annoyance. But other times they can be much bigger and more serious and physical and relational, financial, emotional. These things can all be very real. But in Christ, I believe, because all things can work together for the good of those, I believe in Christ there's always a purpose to the pain. All right. James 1:3-4 says, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. All right. Trials grow us spiritually. They are a part of the maturing process of our lives. They have to be a part of the process, or they are a part of the process that refine our lives and help us learn to reflect Christ in and through those things. One of the things that encouraged me last time we were together is we were talking about trials and how we face them all, about they're allowed by God, they pass through his hands, and that we are facing things that I believe are custom designed for us. And I have to believe that God knows exactly what I need to face and deal with to accomplish the things in my life that he wants to accomplish. And so we looked at Paul and his thorn in the side, and we saw that Paul called it a messenger of Satan, but he also called it something sent by God, which to me seemed like they were polar opposites, and yet we see him use them together. And he goes on in 2 Corinthians 12:7 and says that it kept him from being prideful. It kept him from being proud because of the way that God was using me, is what Paul is saying. If it wasn't for the thorn in my side, if it wasn't for that thing that kept me humble and kept me realizing, hey, you know what? I can be tripped up, and I can be hurt, and I can be broken, and I can make mistakes. I could have become prideful, and it kept me grounded. And that's why in verse 10 he says, that's why I take pleasure in my weakness and in the insults and hardships and persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And I wonder, would he have felt that verse if it wasn't for the thorn in his side? Like, is it okay for you and I to look at this and read these scriptures? And this is Paul saying, God knew I needed this thorn in my side to keep me grounded and humble because of the way that God was going to use me. And we go, wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. That's beautiful. Paul, God knew exactly what you needed to keep you pliable and usable for his will. And we're comfortable saying that about Paul. Are we comfortable saying that about our lives? That God knows exactly what you need. God knows exactly the hardships and the struggles and the battles that I need to face, that I have to walk through to help me be and do what he desires for my life to become. And I want to ask you this tonight. What have you learned in your struggle? What is your struggle teaching you? What are the hardships you're in currently or have faced in the past? What did they teach you about you and your faith and God? Can you look back and go, wow, I really went through this, and you know what? I pull from it like Paul did, right? I pull from it and say, man, that struggle taught me this about myself. And that struggle taught me that I need to adjust the way I see this and handle this. And what are your struggles and trials teaching you? Because the thing is this, trials test our readiness of life. You know, it's one thing to sit in a Sunday school class and talk about trials, and sit in service and talk about trials, and sing about the power of God to see you through. And it's another thing to practically go out and in our lives live that out, and walk through things and feel the emotions and process all of these things to walk. Trials call our faith to the stand. Like, you can't talk it, you got to do it now. You know, in school, you got midterms and finals, and those tend to be set dates. You kind of know they're going to come, and you know, it's been 100 years since I was in school, but you know, I know that my son who just graduated, but when he was in school, there were dynamics. Oh, they're prepping us for the midterm. They're prepping us for the final. They're doing reviews to make sure we have the information for the test that's going to come on this day, and we do that, and that's all good. You cram the night before. I mean, I know, but pop quizzes are a different thing. Pop quizzes are kind of random. There's no warning. It's just you sit down in class, and they're like, clear your desk and take out a number 2 pencil, and they're just a quick test to see where you are. Do you know the material? You know, or not. There's not really time to cram. It's really a test of who you are and where you are honestly. All right. And James tells us that the testing of our faith produces perseverance or endurance. James 1:3, for you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to go. So it leads me to think that if I'm not being tested, that my endurance doesn't have a chance to develop and mature, that I learn how to sustain faith and hope and peace in the midst of things that are happening in my life. Endurance is the ability to hang in there until the end of the trial, you know, and when we have passed the test. That's how you get to the next grade. That's how you get to the next level of maturity, is I go through this level and God stretches me, grows me, and He grows me now to this level. And there are new tests on that one. And what that means is that you can't quit. We don't stop. When a trial is a tough one, you know, we tend to look for the door out, you know, God, get me out of this. But getting out of it isn't always the answer. The answer is get me through this. Back when I was having all my heart stuff, I had to take this test where they wanted to stress my heart to see if there was any damage on it and yada yada. And so I can remember the nurse telling me, Mr. Johnson, we're going to give you this injection and you're going to feel like you're having a heart attack. And I'm like, yeah, well, you know, been there, done that. There's no way it's going to feel the same. In my mind, I thought I'll be a little uncomfortable, but it's not going to be. They injected this stuff in this arm and I literally felt it go up. And it was miserable. I hated it. I'm like, are you sure it's supposed to feel like this? And I had to do it for 5 minutes so that they could run the test. And I remember one point I said, ma'am, how far are we? How long into this are we? And she's like, 45 seconds, Mr. Johnson. And I'm like, oh dear Lord. It was terrible. They said it wasn't going to be fun, and they were honest. I did not enjoy that. I do not recommend it as a birthday gift to anybody. And I just kept asking, how much longer? How much longer? But here's the thing. If I had stopped, because they had another shot that they gave me that stopped the effects of the medicine. But if I didn't get to that 5-minute mark, I would have had to do it over again. And so even though it's terrible, even though it wasn't fun, even though it caused a lot of discomfort, I didn't want to stop short, because I don't want to go through this again. And that's the problem with all of this, is that when we go through struggles and we go through trials and things are allowed or things are, you know, placed in, and the God says, yes, I'm going to bring you into this because I'm trying to instill something in you. I'm trying to teach you you're stronger than you thought, or I'm trying to break something in you. I'm trying to let this thorn in your flesh kind of humble you a little bit so that I can use you in a greater way. You can't stop and you can't quit. We've got to walk through it. I have to let endurance do its perfect work in me so that I become mature and I pass the test. When you run or when you quit or when you say no, or we're always looking for the easiest way out of something that's designed to grow us and to mature us, I think it can actually be detrimental and it delays your growth. I had a very good friend of mine in Hagerstown, Maryland. I used to youth pastor there. Bill Bechtel was his name. And one day we were fishing. He was telling me how he had failed the third grade and that he didn't know what he was going to go home and tell his mom and dad. And so he went home and told his mom that the teacher said they didn't have enough chairs in the fourth grade, so he was going to have to do the third grade again. Sometimes if you fail a grade in school, you got to take it again until you pass. There are certain things we can't avoid and certain things that God doesn't let you cheat on. And as hard as that can be, I thank God for that, because it is part of the building of our lives and the maturing of our faith. That God has his hand on the process and God knows when to end the struggle because the purpose has been realized. But what I can hold on to is this promise. In Isaiah 43, 2-5, he says, "When you go through deep waters, I'll be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of opposition, you will not burn up, and the flames will not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I gave Egypt as a ransom for your freedom. I gave Ethiopia and Seba in your place. Others were given in exchange for you. I traded their lives for yours because you are precious to me. You are honored, and I love you. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will gather you and your children from the east and from the west." And so God has you. God has you. And so what does it take for us to get through the test? One of the things I think is our attitude or our perspective. And you can't always choose what you go through, but you do choose how you respond to it and what you do with it. And James says to count it all joy. Romans 8:28 says, "All things work together for the good." And what this verse says is important, but what the verse doesn't say is also important. Romans doesn't tell us that everything that happens to us is good. It says that God will work things for good. James doesn't tell us that that the trials are joyful in themselves, but that we can be joyful in them because we know and we trust that God is at work and God is doing something and God is going to do something. And so the joy that James is talking about is not really circumstantial. Happiness tends to be based on what happens. But, you get a raise, you get a promotion, you're happy. But if you lose the job, you're sad, right? Happiness fluctuates in our lives due to the circumstance or based on the circumstance. But joy is connected to our internal well-being regardless of what is happening externally. So I can have joy here even though I'm walking through a struggle around me, right? Because it's based in the Spirit that comes from God and on His truth that is revealed in His Word. I can have joy because I know God and I know His Word and the promise of Him that He will see us through. And so I find joy in that while I'm walking through my tough time. So what God has done is to reveal to us. I said on a Sunday a while back that some things are secret and some things are revealed. And God reveals to us the purpose of our trials. In James 1:3, because you know the testing of your faith produces perseverance. To have joy in the midst of our trials, we need to see where God is taking us in them. You see, the enemy doesn't want you to think or know that God can use your times of trial to do or grow something wonderful in you. And the endurance that leads to growth and the endurance that leads to maturity that you and God both desire for your lives. The problem is this, and probably most women know this better than most, that birth involves pain. What a mom doesn't do is quit because she knows something. You know, when the labor pains are coming and the contractions are happening, and I'm there just kind of saying, breathe, breathe. They're doing the work. I'm just kind of coaching through. But moms know this, that on the other side of the pain is something beautiful. And on the other side of the pain, her child is going to be born. And so often the joy of having the child outweighs the pain of the birth they're experiencing. And for our family, my wife chose to do it 4 different times, that the baby was worth the labor. And I think sometimes the trial, I have to find joy on the other side of what God's done or He's doing in me and growing in me. And so if we're in a trial a day or a month or a year, my word to you is keep pushing. God is going to use this to grow in something in you, to birth something in you. And Peter understood this more. Peter in 1 Peter 1:6 says, "So be truly glad, there is wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while." Peter doesn't deny that trials are stressful, that trials are hard. I don't think Peter went through trials differently than you go through them. I think we all feel them. He says in 1 Peter 4:12, "Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you as though something strange were happening to you." See, the purpose is always to test our faith. And then he goes on in verse 13 and he says, keep rejoicing, like in the midst of it. Keep rejoicing. Keep giving God praise. Keep being thankful because God has not abandoned you. God is with you. God has a purpose in this and God will see you through. And that's why Jesus was able to say in Hebrews 12:2, "For the joy set before him, he endured the cross," because he was able to look beyond it and see the glory that awaited and the deliverance of those whom he loved. He looked beyond it and saw you. He felt the agony of it so much that he sweated blood. It felt like drops of rain in Luke 22. He didn't sleep the night before, right? Jesus felt it too. But he kept going back and waking up the disciples and saying, pray with me. And he felt it. But for the joy that was before him, he endured. James 1:2 uses the word consider. And that's an accounting term. And it means to add everything up and to come to the right conclusion. And so the conclusion of the trials that God uses is to grow us spiritually towards maturity. And so after a time like this, we all just want to ask, so what do I need to grow in my trial? There has to be a bottom line to it all. God doesn't leave us endlessly in things. And so I'm so glad that God put verse 5 in here, because I don't always know. And I tell my kids, often, listen, don't be afraid to do the hard thing. The easy thing is not always the best thing. Don't be afraid to do the hard thing. Sometimes, again, this is my family talk. Sometimes you have to embrace the suck. Like some things are just not going to be fun, but don't be afraid of it, because there's a purpose and there's a payoff on the other side of it. James says this in James 1:5, "If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you." See, the wisdom that we need to know and to handle all of these things is in Him and in Him alone. Again, what verses say and what they don't say is important. What verse 5 doesn't say is that we should quiz God about why our trials. And the truth is that sometimes we may know and sometimes we may not know. There are certain things I don't think we're going to understand or see clearly until we enter into glory one day. Did God ever tell Job? Right? No. Job, listen. Here's what's happening. Nope, God never had that conversation with him, right? And so instead of why, I should be focused on how do you want me to use this trial to grow spiritually, and who am I to cooperate with? God, who are you using in this to help me? And God, what are you trying to grow in me, right? And this is what God will answer without making you look foolish. If He allows them to grow us, then we need people on this journey. And it's not just asking the right question, it's asking the right question with the right spirit. James 1:6-8 says, "But when you ask Him, make sure your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they're unstable in everything that they do." To ask God for wisdom and to figure out then if we're going to obey him or not. James calls that being double-minded, right? God, I want your wisdom, but I'm probably not going to listen. Well, then, why would we even think that or say that? It makes no sense. And you've heard me say before, God wastes nothing. And I genuinely believe that. But I want to say this to you. God will not waste your trials. Don't you waste them. Right? The reason we need to ask for wisdom on what to do and how to handle things is to keep from wasting the opportunities and keep from wasting the moments. If God brings us into something to teach us something, but I refuse to learn it, or I'm unwilling to change, I'm unwilling to adapt and to pivot, then you know what happens? It's like failing the test. I got to go back and take that thing over again. It's not possible to go through something and not learn what we needed to learn. We start vacillating back and forth and going back and forth between God's perspective and our flesh perspective. And when I do that, I'm not going to get anywhere. I'm just going to spin my wheels. And when I look at my trials only through human eyes, I'm going to react humanly. Right? I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be bitter. I'm going to carry a grudge. I'm going to be mad at the world. This is unfair. This isn't just. I take my frustrations out on people around me. I get unhappy. And then when you're unhappy, people around you are going to sense it and feel it, right? And eventually we end up mad at God. Why would you do this to me? Why would you let that happen? And I can't superimpose my flesh on God's will. Wisdom keeps us from losing heart. And the fastest way to become discouraged in a trial is to be in the flesh. And so it is better to be in the wisdom of God, to trust He's there, to trust His purposes and His perspective. 2 Corinthians 4:16-18 says, that is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. For our present troubles are small, and they won't last very long, and yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them that will last forever. So don't look at the troubles we see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. If you look at our struggles with an eternal perspective, our spirits can be renewed, and I can press on, and I can receive what God has intended for me to receive, to learn, to do, and to grow. The human view tends to just see that things are falling apart. Our human perspective tends to just see that things aren't what we want them to be, and they're frustrating, and it's a perfect formula for discouragement. Right? But if I can hold on to Jesus, the pain of my trial will be temporary, and it will be overcome with the joy of His presence. And so we see this. James tells us in James 1:9-11, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. But the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom fails and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. And he mentions two kinds of people here, rich and poor, and both ends of the spectrum. All right, so you got both ends of the spectrum, and this includes everybody that's in between. And James is going to tell us what a godly reaction to a trial looks like. So the poor, humble circumstances, told to glory in their high position. Like, we tend not to associate humble circumstances with high positions. We don't think that way, but God, His ways are not our ways. And so why would James tell them to glory or to rejoice in his high position? And I'm going to tell you why. Because we've already learned that even when things are tough, we can have joy. We can have joy knowing that God allowed it in, that God is aware, that He's using it to grow us spiritually. And when the trial is over and we've been faithful, I can glory in that. Well, what if God makes things so tight, or makes things tight so I have to focus on my riches in Him? And is there a such thing as forced contentment? Right? What about the rich man? They had a lesson to learn that it can all fade away. It's really amazing when you think of how much confidence we put in things that can so quickly be removed. Maybe in your life you've never had to trust God at that level. Like, God, if you don't show up, if you don't provide, we're doomed. We have nothing. and it's the end of us. You know, stocks drop, inflation soars. God shows you that riches are like a fading flower. That's what he says here. And so God may put you in a place of dependency, not so that you panic, but that you would learn that your dependency is on him and not other stuff, and how to trust him in a way that you would have never understood before. And so both need to learn that God is their source, the poor and the rich, and everyone in between. And when those lessons are learned, both can rejoice. It's like an oyster that turns a grain of sand, that irritates it. So it creates a secretion around it and coats the grain of sand to smooth it out, which then becomes a pearl. When I'm able to praise and to worship and to keep my eyes on Jesus through my trials, when I worship in my struggle, God turns those things into something valuable in my life because he grows me, stretches me. I learn things about myself and I learn things about him. James 1:12 says, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." See, we hear crown of life and it sounds like something you get in glory, but it's really something that you can enjoy today, because when God crowns you with life, it isn't just physical, but it's spiritual as well. There's a deeper experience with him, and it impacts the way that I live my life today, right? When I go into something and I say for the joy, and I learn, and God stretches and he grows, I've passed the test. And I don't know if you've ever had a test that was tough in school or college or your master's or whatever, but you studied and you did really well. Like you put the work in, and man, you just went over it and over it. And when the moment came, you kind of knew the stuff, and you did. How did that feel? How did it feel when they got the grade and you got your A, and you feel good? Like, man, I did the work and it paid off. Well, it's kind of like that, but spiritually. You pass the test, and I can promise you that the path that God has for each of us, while it may be lined with trials and struggles that are going to stretch us and try us, and at times maybe even be painful, and even when we get off track, God has a way of making good come from that and to get us back on the track. But I can promise you this, God is always up to something good. And so that is his promise to us. So a couple of questions to leave you with tonight. One, am I wasting the trial or the hardship that I'm experiencing right now? Am I so focused on getting out of it that I'm not asking God, what are you teaching me about me in this? What are you teaching me about you in this? And then step back and think, what is it producing in you? Is it producing fear or stress? Or is it producing faith and trust? And always listen, because I promise you, God is saying something to you. And I pray that you hear it. Be encouraged. Be encouraged. The best is yet to come. And I bless you.